and welcome everyone. Thank you for making the time to be here in person. I know the rains have been challenging, at least for me, who drove up here from San Jose. But we have a great event in store for you. Before I even begin, I must thank Naomi and Nargis, especially Nargis because she made a cross-country trip to be here with us today. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. We love you for all the work that you do, and we are so excited for what you're going to share with us today. So thank you and welcome, Naomi and Nargis.
Thank you.
Before we begin, I'll just run you through a small description of what we're going to do today, a short introduction of our esteemed speakers, and then we'll start off with Naomi with her presentation and then move on to Nargis with hers. And then, so without further ado, welcome everyone. We are in for a treat. We are going to be talking about poetry and prayer. And our conversations today and our presentations by our distinguished panelists are going to be looking about poems by Rumi, Ibn Arabi, and Yehuda Amichai as our primary examples. And in keeping with the vision of the Madrasa-Midrasha Program here at the GTU, we will also focus on how poetry enacts encounter, not only between the writer and the reader, but also between the human and divine realms, and between religious traditions. Naomi Seidman is going to start us off. She has been here at the GTU for more than 20 years before she left us to take her position as Chancellor Jackman Professor of the Arts at the University of Toronto in the Department for the Study of Religion and the Center for Diaspora and Transnational Studies. Her fourth book, yay.
But who's counting?
Yeah. Who's counting? Yes. Humility. Yeah, who's counting? Sarah Schneider and
Beis Yaakov.
Thank you. Beis Yaakov Movement, a revolution in the name of tradition, won a National Jewish Book Award in Women's Studies in 2019. A 2016, and I will not say this right, Guggenheim Fellow. Guggenheim Fellow. Professor Seidman is presently completing a study of the Hebrew and Yiddish transactions of Freud writings during his lifetime.
Translations, yeah, I just actually turned that in 2 days ago.
All right, congratulations.
Wow, impressive, impressive, dear.
Nargis Ali-Virani, a dear visiting scholar for a long time, has been a dear visiting scholar for a long, long time with the Center for Islamic Studies here at the GTU. And she is currently Associate Teaching Professor of Arabic at Emory University and has taught a variety of courses related to the Arabic language and literature, Quranic and Islamic studies, women's studies, and Middle Eastern films at the University of British Columbia. I'm already dreaming about another program with Naomi and Nargis around films. Yes, let's dream on. Nargis holds a PhD in Arabic and Islamic Studies from Harvard University and has studied the Quran extensively at Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo. So we are in for a treat today. And without further ado, I hand it over to Naomi Seidman and Nargis Ali-Virani to take us through this exceptional experience of poetry and prayer.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Majabin and the Madrasa-Midrasha Program, and to the GTU and to Matt for helping organize. And it's wonderful to see Jim here and Arthur and just so many people I love and in this room and near just. And if it's okay, I just want to start with a really quick story, which is that many years ago, I don't remember how many, Munir and Nargis and Arthur, who I just saw on Zoom, took a trip to Jerusalem, to Israel, Palestine, and on Shabbat, Nargis and Munir and Arthur went to the West Bank, to the territories, to Bethlehem, I think is where you went. And I stayed in the Jewish part of town to hang out with my Jewish friends. And we were all supposed to meet in this cafe in the center of town. Oh, Jim, you helped organize that whole trip and get the money for it. And I'm waiting in the cafe, and the manager comes with the phone. It's an emergency. and it's Munir on the phone, and he's like, "We're stuck at a checkpoint. Can you help?" And and I was like, "You mean like call my friend the prime minister?" I was like, my heart started racing. I didn't know what to do. And I just ran back to the hotel to find my passport. I was going to go to the other side of the checkpoint at yell in Hebrew at the soldiers. "Those are my friends." And, but then there was another phone call from you, and it said, "It's okay." Somebody said, "Just try the next checkpoint." And I had a thought, which I shared when we came back, which is that the lives of Jews, Muslims, and Christians are insufficiently tied together. That if every time there's someone stuck at a checkpoint, then now we can say worse than that, right? That if every time it's that their Jewish friends or their Muslim friends or their Christian friends are freaking out. If every time someone's, my Muslim friends are stuck at a checkpoint, there's some Jewish woman in the Jewish part of town who's really upset, then the Messiah will come. That was what I thought. And that's what I think about the GTU, that this is a place in which we have tied our fates together. We have decided that we live, if one of us is, forget, the nice attempts to be good. This is, our lives are so intertwined, and I feel that way about so many people in this room. There's just, was my life for so long, and so I really appreciate checking in with this space right now. And I think this does relate to the poems that I brought today. I brought two poems, one by Yehuda Amichai, and then I thought another one by Zelda, like Cher, like Madonna. She has one name, Zelda, which is funny to compare to Cher, because Zelda was an ultra-Orthodox woman who was as far away from, Madonna and Cher as can be imagined. So maybe we'll get to that. So the plan is that I'm going to, we'll read one poem together with me, and then we'll move to Nargis, and then we'll move back to me, and then back, and we'll see if but those are my two poems. And so the poem by Yehuda Amichai, Yehuda Amichai was a Hebrew poet who died, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, born in Germany in an Orthodox family, came to Palestine then in 1936, and was a poet who really heard something about the Hebrew language. And I think I need to say a little bit about that, the fact that this is in Hebrew. So poetry and prayer are probably intertwined in all languages, right? So poetry tends to be the kind of heightened prayer, the heightened language that prayer is too. In the Bible, the two genres are very closely enmeshed. In the rabbinic and medieval development of poetry, of prayer, the piyut, which really means, it's the same word as poetry, that was the standard genre, that to write a prayer and to write a poem was more or less the same thing, and it was only in modernity that these really diverged. But the story in the case of Hebrew is really special, because Hebrew was not a vernacular spoken everyday language. It was basically the language of Jewish prayer, as well as the language of the sacred texts. But most Jews would know the Hebrew just from reciting it, as opposed to living it out in their everyday lives. And what this means is that the Hebrew language is intimately connected with prayer, even if in its secular form. And secular Hebrew poets tried really hard to kind of wrench Hebrew from what Robert Alter calls its echo chamber, its sacred echo chamber, to be able to write about, like a one-night stand, and not immediately be thinking about, let's say, Jacob and the angel. And the reason why I mention that is because Yehuda Amichai wrote a poem called Jacob and the Angel, which is about a one-night stand. I don't know your name. What's your name? We've been wrestling all night. And he was the one who, instead of trying to let the language of secular, modern Israeli poetry break free of this old religious tradition, he liked to find those places where they met in the most interesting and powerful and richest ways. So this is a poem in which Yehuda Amichai does not go to synagogue, does not pray in the usual way on Yom Kippur, the most sacred day of Jewish prayer. And instead of prayer, he does something else that is this poem that actually constitutes a new form of prayer. So I thought this was an interesting expression of the duality of prayer, poetry and prayer that we're looking at today. And so I think it's always important to read the poem in its original language and then the translation. Does everybody, Ron, maybe you can hand out these poems? And I'll start reading in the Hebrew. Yehuda Amichai, this is from a collection of poetry called Jerusalem 1967, Yerushalayim 1967. B'Yom Kippur, B'Shnat Tashkach, לבשתי בגדי חג כהים והלכתי לעיר העתיקה בירושלים. עמדתי זמן רב לפני כוך חנותו של ערבי, לא רחוק משער שכם, חנות כפתורים ורוסנים וסלילי חוטים בכל צבע, ולחצניות ואבזמים, אור יקר וצבעים רבים, כמו ארון קודש פתוח. אמרתי לו בליבי, שגם לאבי הייתה חנות כזאת של חוטים וכפתורים. הסברתי לו בליבי על כל עשרות השנים והגורמים והמקרים שאני עכשיו פה, וחנות אבי שרופה שם, והוא קבור פה. כשסיימתי הייתה שעת נעילה. גם הוא הוריד את התריס ונעל את השער, ואני חזרתי עם כל המתפללים הביתה. Just occurred to me that we don't have, could the people on Zoom see the poem?
You want me to put it up? I can.
Yeah, that would
Should
be
I?
great if you can.
Sure.
So here it is in English translation. On Yom Kippur in 1967, and I'll just remind you, because the poem doesn't say so explicitly, that this is a few months after the 1967, the Six-Day War, which was in 1967, which was followed among the Israeli population by what could be called a messianic wave of triumphal religious feeling. We Jews now own Jerusalem. God is clearly on our side. Against all odds, we thought we were on the verge of extinction, and we won this great military battle in 6 days, etc. And this is a poetic voice that pushes against that mood, I think, in a very powerful way, while at the same time recognizing the kind of power of going to pray for the first time since the War of 1948, when Jerusalem was divided between Israel and Jordan. Jerusalem was, quote unquote, reunited. And I'm going to avoid the messianic triumphal tone by which that is sometimes said, as Yehuda Amichai does. So there are a couple of, maybe I just should explain two other things, maybe three. It's easy to over-explain, right? The heresy of paraphrase. So there's 1967, the year of forgetting. Does anyone get why 1967 is the year of forgetting? I'm sure you do, Ron. Tishkach, Tafshin Chavchet.
Oh.
So the Hebrew date is said in letters. So in other words, Jews live in two calendars. So you have 1967, which also happens to be the Hebrew date, Tafshin Chavchet. And because it's Hebrew letters, occasionally it also forms a word. So the Hebrew word for 1967, after Rosh Hashanah, after the New Year, is forgetting. So this is the year of forgetting. So it's a kind of play on words that, if you don't know how the Jewish calendar works, is just mysterious poetry, but actually has a reason. And the other thing I think too is fairly obvious in English, but maybe I'll just say it, which is that Yom Kippur, the final prayer of the Yom Kippur liturgy, is called the closing of the gates. And the reason why it's called the closing of the gates is because this is it. You know, this is your due date. If you don't get your prayers in now, God shuts the gate. So it's as if Yom Kippur, the gates are open, all requests, all prayers, or whatever. There is a little extension possible, but we won't get into that. So the last one is the closing of the gates. So everybody, you spend the whole prayer on your feet. And don't forget, people have been fasting for over 24 hours, 25 hours at this point. On your feet before the open ark, which is usually the most lavish thing in a synagogue. And in the temple in Jerusalem, it also was decorated with lavish jewels, right, that we hear about in the Bible, even if we no longer have them. Now we just have a wall. So that's the kind of setup. And I'll read it in English. I'm not going to ask people to read it because I want to be able to stress it to make it come across. On Yom Kippur in 1967, the year of forgetting, I put on my dark holiday clothes and walked to the old city of Jerusalem. For a long time, I stood in front of an Arab's hole-in-the-wall shop, not far from Damascus Gate, a shop with buttons and zippers and spools of thread in every color and snaps and buckles, a rare light and many colors like an open ark. I told him in my heart that my father too had a shop like this with thread and buttons. I explained to him in my heart about all the decades and the causes and the events, why I am now here, and my father's shop was burned there, and he is buried here. When I finished, it was time for the closing of the gate's prayer. He too lowered the shutters and locked the gate, and I returned with all the worshipers home. I could talk about this poem. I've thought about it a lot, but I'm just curious to know what you think. I don't think it's a difficult poem. Yehuda Amichai was sometimes seen as just a very easy poet, right? What is he trying to say? What's the setup? Would that things were different. Yeah. I mean, just to say the most simplest thing, he's on his way to pray at the wall, at the Western Wall. He's on his way to ask God for forgiveness for his sins as a Jew, according to what he's supposed to do on the holiest day of the year. A place where people are filled with the emotion of the reunited city, the ancient temple, right? All the mood that was the Jewish mood of 1967. I remember it. I was young, but I still remember it. Instead, he gets stuck halfway there, if anyone has been to Jerusalem, right? Those narrow walls, the beautiful little shops with the big things of spices, right? He just gets stuck. And instead of going to the wall, to be a good Jew, to pray, to thank God for the reunited city, he goes to this Arab shop, and he has a different kind of prayer standing there, which is a prayer that he doesn't say out loud. This is not a prayer that he shares. And what does he see in that shop? Linking with the other at a very human level. He actually sees two things. He sees his own past. He sees his father's button shop. By the way, I think one reason I love this poem so much is because I love the idea of a button shop. Like, can you imagine supporting a family on buttons? And I'm thinking the Arab shopkeeper is probably thinking, would it kill you to buy a button? Or a zipper or something? It's me. I always feel guilty in these stores. I have to buy a little something, right? And so it's both his father's button shop and the Holy Ark. The idea that and I don't even want to say what that means, because one of the things that Yehuda Amichai, I guess, is well known for is this notion of finding the secular in the sacred, which is also a value, and finding the sacred in the ordinary, or the ordinary in the sacred. In other words, to see Jacob's wrestling with an angel as a gay one-night stand is to recognize something human about that encounter, and then to see a one-night stand as wrestling with the angel, to be able to bring those spheres together, and to feel the ordinariness of making a living, of the beauty of a button. Somebody who's really into buttons, in case you didn't get that. And to pray to that man and to not say to him, look, I know we just fell on you like a ton of bricks. I see the soldiers all around. I see this is right. This is like year one of the occupation for this man. I see that, and it has something to do with my past. The gormim, the one word here, which is really not sacred, is the word gormim, which means the causes, the causations. Suddenly he throws in a word that he takes on. The causations. Yeah, we know all that. Let me just throw that in. Yeah, I could say that. I don't even want to say that, even though he says it to us, right, the readers of the poem. What I want to say to you is, this is my prayer. At this moment, that I see in you my own history. I see my own history in you, and I see in that the sacred, the holiest place in the Jewish religion, with its colorful, fabulous, sacred stones that are just as sacred if they're simply buttons and zippers. So maybe that's enough for that. And we'll move on, and we'll see where we get, unless somebody wanted to say something. Yes.
Well, I may have eaten too much of that wonderful chocolate, and it's doing something to the Stern Johnny in the brain, but...
Yeah, there was, I think, a little hash in it. No, not really. That was a joke.
I'm fascinating to a feeling that this is like, for me, the authentic messianic moment.
Yeah.
When a Jew and Arab are coming together around a shared affection for a shop, but it's our father's shop or my father's shop.
My father's shop.
For me, this is how I would like to see it go in Jerusalem, but everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So that's, the poem is beautiful.
And you just made a prayer.
Oh, thank you. I did, but thank you. Anyway, thank you for bringing it to us.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple of quick thoughts is, it's so interesting you say he's on the way to the Western Wall. We can presume that, we don't know that for sure.
He does say it.
Yeah. Does he say he's on his way there?
To the old city of Jerusalem.
Oh, he said he put on his clothes.
Well, he went.
Yeah, yeah.
Who knows?
He dressed
Who knows?
up.
But my point is, he stops along the way and he finds his own holy place here.
Yes. Yes. Very
He never
beautifully put.
enters the Holy of Holy. He stands outside it and notices it. And then the Ni'ilah, the locking of it, is simultaneous with the vendor. So he never encounters
Yeah.
the person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a certain alienation
Yeah.
and distance kind of maybe required for that holy experience.
Or
But
maybe it's the reality of
Yes.
how, what languages we speak. And there's something very familiar about that. You want to say something and you can't. Yeah.
Yeah, quickly. Yeah, why the 1967 is the year of forgetting. Yeah, if we ever understand why 1961 is the year of forgetting, and then I think this poem is linking with that 1961.
Yeah, yeah.
So can you explain a bit?
What is the forgetting? Where is the forgetting? I think it's, who knows, but one thing it might be is forgetting that you were once a victim, that there are victims, that your triumph is someone else's disaster. I think is one interpretation. I don't want to say it's the interpretation.
Okay, then if I want to know, I should go back and study.
Go back and study. That's what was it? Hillel said that, standing on one foot. Go and study.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, thanks to GTU, thanks to the Madrasa-Midrasha Program, thanks to Mahjabeen. Munir has been there for 15 years, and I have come many a times at his invitation as well. It's always wonderful. It's a privilege that I don't ever take for granted, because this is a very special place. There's no doubt about it, which is why some of us keep coming back even when we are afar. I wanted to, when Naomi and I discussed this, we were kind of dealing with one, the other, and the idea of prayer, both of them in some ways, poetry to prayer. And in fact, I just deleted one of my slides because already I'm going to not look at that, because Naomi really talked about the poetic language and how the poetic language and the scriptural language in some ways, the language of prayer, was so intertwined in so many ways in pre-modern times, whether it was Arabic or Hebrew, and particularly with Arabic and Hebrew, that's true. So I have a very special poem which is from Rumi's Masnavi, and it's a story, really. It's a story that many of you may have heard, and it's one of my favorites. So this is a Masnavi, which really means they are rhyming couplets. It's a particular kind in Persian literature. It's poetic, however, but it's done in rhyming couplets. And these go to up to 30,000. There are 6 books of the Masnavi. In one of this, there is a dialogue. There is a dialogic between 2 believers. One probably has a higher status, and that other that has the highest status is Moses. So in the Muslim theology and Muslim practice, Moses is, of course, the prophet, in the same line of prophet as Prophet Muhammad, and so all Muslims will always send blessings on all the names of the prophet. Here is Rumi's imagination about an encounter between, so I'm going to tell you the story first and then maybe read it briefly. The story is that Moses hears somewhere out of nowhere that there's a shepherd who is saying things, and I'm summarizing it in some very beautiful ways, as if you would talk to a loved one, maybe a child, maybe a beloved. You know, when you come, I'm going to treat you so well. I'm going to press your feet. I'm going to feed you with the best goat's milk. I am going to make a bed for you. I'm going to take the lice out of your head. I'm going to oil and massage you. And Moses is outside of the shepherd's hut and wonders what is happening. So this is your scene where Moses comes in and realizes the shepherd's talking to himself. And either he's gone bonkers or he's talking to someone. And of course, the shepherd responds by saying, I'm talking to God. And Moses is absolutely flabbergasted, right? How can you talk to God in such language? God's not human. God doesn't need your oil massages, and God doesn't have lice in his hair. How dare you talk to God? Like, you have committed the gravest of blasphemy. And this coming from the prophet of God, as Rumi sets it up, devastates the poor shepherd. And the shepherd just feels like, oh my God, I am doomed forever, and leaves his hut and just runs into the desert. Moses is, by the way, in this Muslim imagination, on his way to have his meeting with God. So he's passing through the desert, and he sees this and tells the person off, and then he has the communication from God and says, what have you done, Moses? You know, we sent you to earth to unite our believers with us. We haven't sent you as a divider. What have you done? What made you do that? What right do you have? Everyone's speech in prayer has a separate connection with God. What may be wrong for you is absolutely right for the other person. So if there's that long conversation, I'm going to read it in translation. And it's Moses' time to be devastated now. You know, what has he done? This is God chiding him and telling him off, essentially. So Moses does what a good prophet should go back and ask for this person, this shepherd's forgiveness. So he backtracks and goes back, can't find the shepherd yet, goes, follows him in the desert, and finally finds the shepherd and says, look, I have good news for you. God actually accepts your prayer. There's no problem with your prayer. You can say whatever you want, and God has accepted. I have great news for you. Most of the story stops here, but the last part of the story I find really interesting, because the shepherd looks at him completely bewildered, and Moses thinks that he hasn't heard it, shakes him up and says, look, I'm telling you, your prayer is accepted. And shepherd looks at him and says, Moses, I'm far beyond that. Okay, so here is this Rumi's story. Moses heard a shepherd on the road praying, God, where are you? I want to help you to fix your shoes and comb your hair. I want to wash your clothes and pick the lice off. I want to bring you milk to kiss your little hands and feet when it's time for you to go to bed. I want to sweep your room and keep it neat. God, my sheep and goats are yours. All I can say remembering you is, Moses could stand it no longer. Who are you talking to? The one who made us and made the earth and made the sky? Don't talk about shoes and socks with God. And what's this with your little hands and feet? Such blasphemous familiarity sounds like you're chatting with your uncles. Only something that grows needs milk. Only someone with feet needs shoes, not God. Even if you meant God's human representatives, as when God says, I was sick and you did not visit me. You know, there's that whole story where someone says, God, I've been calling you, and says, when I was sick, you didn't visit me. And says, how could I not do? A sick person came to your door asking for help and you didn't help. So even if it's, a human representative of God, when God said, I was sick and you did not visit me, even then this tone would be foolish and irreverent. Use appropriate terms. Fatima is a fine name for a woman, but if you call a man Fatima, it's an insult. Body and birth language are right for us on this side of the river, but not for addressing the origin, not for Allah. The shepherd repented and tore his clothes and sighed and wandered out into the desert. A sudden revelation came to Moses, God's voice. You have separated me from my own. Did you come as a prophet to unite or to sever? I have given each being a separate and unique way of seeing and knowing that knowledge. What seems wrong to you is right for him. What is poison to one is honey to someone else. Purity and impurity, sloth and diligence in worship, these mean nothing to me. I am apart from all that. Ways of worshiping are not to be ranked as better or worse than one another. Hindus do Hindu things. The Dravidian Muslims in India do what they do. It's all praise. It's all right. It's not me that's glorified in acts of worship. It's the worshippers. I don't hear the words they say. I don't hear the words they say. I look inside at the humility. That broken, open lowliness is the reality, not the language. Forget phraseology. I want burning, burning. Be friends with your burning. Burn up your thinking and your forms of expression. Moses, those who pay attention to ways of behaving and speaking are one sort. Lovers who burn are another altogether. Don't impose a property tax on a burned out village. Don't scold the lover. The wrong way he talks is better than 100 right ways of others. Inside the Kaaba, it doesn't matter which direction you point your prayer rug. So all Muslims face to the Kaaba for prayer. But if you're inside the Kaaba, it doesn't matter where you put your inside it, right? Inside the Kaaba, it doesn't matter which direction you point your prayer rug. The ocean diver doesn't need snowshoes. The love religion has no code or doctrine. So the ruby has nothing engraved on it. It doesn't need markings. God began speaking deeper mysteries to Moses, vision and words which cannot be recorded here. They poured into Moses and through him. He left himself and came back. He went to eternity and came back here. Many times this happened. It's foolish of me to try and say this. This is now Rumi injecting the poetic voice. It's foolish of me to try and say what Moses experienced. If I did say it, it would uproot our human intelligences. It would shatter all writing pens. Moses ran after the shepherd. He followed the bewildered footprints, in one place moving straight like a castle, across a chessboard, in another sideways like a bishop, now surging like a wave cresting, now sliding down like a fish, with always his feet making geometry symbols in the sand, recording his wandering state. This whole state is for Rumi like a chess game, right? Moses finally caught up with him. I was wrong. God has revealed to me that there are no rules for worship. Say whatever and however your loving tells you to. Your sweet blasphemy is the truest devotion. Through you a whole world is freed. Loosen your tongue and don't worry what comes out. It's all the light of the Spirit. The shepherd replied, Moses, Moses, I've gone beyond even that. You applied the whip and my horse shied and jumped out of itself. The divine nature and my human nature came together. Bless your scolding. Bless your scolding hand and your arm. I can't say what's happened. What I'm saying now is not my real condition. It can't be said. The shepherd grew quiet. When you look in a mirror, you see yourself, not the state of the mirror. This is this whole idea of the other that I feel like really comes in, right? With Amichai and the shopkeeper. The shepherd grew quiet. When you look in a mirror, you see yourself, not the state of the mirror. The flute player puts breath into a flute. And who makes the music? Not the flute player. Whenever you speak praise or thanksgiving to God, it's always like this dear shepherd's simplicity. When you eventually see through the veils to how things really are, you will keep saying again and again, this is certainly not like we thought it was. Okay, so I have 3 different poems. I'm going to stop at one of them here and see. So I connected parts of it with the poem that Naomi had shared with me in terms of the
I'm
other.
also wondering what was in that baklava. Shatters the writing pen.
I
Beautiful.
advisedly and wisely did not touch the baklava yet. I had something else that had hash already in it, right?
Wow, beautiful.
So very quickly, this is a quatrain that I want to read. I don't know if any of you have heard about Hallaj. He died in early 10th century, 922. And Mansur al-Hallaj, supposedly in his own mystical state, claimed something in Arabic that we say, Ana al-Haq, I am the truth. And for which he was chastised and, was considered blasphemous and eventually crucified. Of course, there is a 4-volume work on him from Louis Massignon that shows how much of more of a political angle there was to it. There's a very beautiful poem of Hallaj, Kafartu bidinillah wa kufrun wajibun alayya. وعند المسلمين حرام فاقتلوني يا ثقاتي في قتل حياتي ومماتي في حياتي وحياتي في مماتي. So here's your language completely upside down, as I call it, turning language upside down. Kafartu bidin Allah. I have blasphemed in the faith of God, in the path of God, sorry. Wa kufrun wajibun. Blasphemy is my duty. He's completely turning all religious precepts and the language all completely upside down. That I have committed blasphemy in the path of God, but that is my duty, wajibun. It's what is absolutely essential for me to do. But to other Muslims, it's forbidden. It's haram for them. Al-Muslimin, وعند المسلمين حرام. Okay? فاقتلوني يا ثقاتي. Kill me for that, oh my trustworthy ones. في قتلي حياتي. In my death is my life. So kill me, my faithful friends. All right. ومماتي في حياتي. My death is in my life and my life is in my death, right? So I wanted you to experience this beautiful poetry. Okay.
كفرت بدين الله.
This is the same poem I read for you.
الكفر واجب علي. المسلمين حرام فاقتلوني يا ثقاتي فاقتلوني يا ثقاتي إن في قتلي حياتي ومماتي في حياتي وحياتي في مماتي. سئمت نفسي حياتي في الرسوم الباليات فاقتلوني واحرقوني بعظام الفانيات. ثم برفعتي في القبور الدارسات تجد سر حبيبي في طوايا الباقيات. ومن أحوى نحن روحان حنان بدنا. فإن أبصرتني أبصرته وإن أبصرتنا ومن
So here he again hearkens, part of that poetry talks about the fact that we're all created from one soul, every human person, and each one connected with God. When you look at me, you look at him. When you look at him, you're looking at all of us, right? So there is this, the unity of being, and that unity of being is united through love for each other. So that's what he talks about here. I have a different poem from Ibn Arabi, but you have a second poem from Zelda. You want to go with that first?
Yeah?
Sure.
Okay, so do you mind passing this out? Sorry, this one's a little bit longer, and I don't have the Hebrew, but I hope that some of you who, since this is the GTU, I'll just assume you all know the Bible by heart. Well, the Hebrew Bible. You can hear the echoes So maybe a little bit about Zelda. So Zelda was one of the, do you know how there's people you see around on the street all the time? In Berkeley, like the people you always see, they're always walking. Zelda was one of those people. She was a kindergarten teacher that married very late in life. I think she was in her 50s when she married. And she came from a very well-known Hasidic family. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Chabad Rebbe in Brooklyn, was a cousin. She carried the Schneerson name. And she was just known to be kind of this like crazy street person, like with mystical ideas. And then in the 60s, she got married, and her husband found out she'd been writing poetry all these years and persuaded her to publish her poetry. And she became a kind of instant sensation already in her 50s, along with the whole Israeli scene in the 60s, which was, you know, drugs and India and mental illness and bisexuality, just this kind of scene. And into this scene, this ultra-Orthodox, middle-aged, overweight kindergarten teacher suddenly fell like a huge figure. And she developed this following of young women who, her husband died pretty soon afterwards, and she would still continue to walk around the streets and people would look at her like, oh, there's that woman. But she had a kind of following of young women that tended to wear these like flowing white clothing that lived with her and treated her like a kind of saint. I don't know, very odd. Look her up. I'll avoid the stories and just so you have an image of what we're talking about here. This is the one named poet Zelda. And one of her poems, very, I think, typical. I think this one
I'm
might
going
be.
to share it.
Oh yes,
And
please.
tell me which
I'll read
ones,
it.
right? It's
To
long.
light, yes. And you know, obviously, somebody who lived in a world of mystical illumination. Let's just call it pretty much all the time, while walking around the streets as you know, the way she was. To light candles in all the worlds, this is Sabbath. To light Sabbath candles is the leap of a soul pregnant with secrets, mysterious with the fire of sunset, to a magnificent sea. As I light the candles, my room turns to a river of fire. My heart sinks in emerald waterfalls. But on the first day of the week, my soul is thrown from the ocean's heart to a land's shore, long, narrow, and desolate. When I come to the store, the grocer immediately senses that I've come from another planet, and with dismay surveys my looks foreign to him, the remnant of the abyss, and in his cold pupils, as if in a black mirror, I see my crumpled scarf, my embarrassed smile. And in the store stands another woman, a round lady, slowly selecting golden fruit, a creature of the distant world. I wake up from a daydream when the tone of the air, the rhythm of voices changes, for the short one discovered that her money was gone. Woe to me! The dark grocer pours dung of suspicion on my disheveled, neglected looks. Before his gaze, my future wilts like a flower, my past withers. My dreams are dying. Woe to me, for I am alone in the thick of the forest, in the darkness. In the darkness, a roaring lion answers my weeping, and mute trees set on me from all sides. The door is open, but I cannot get out from the store's trap. Now I see with cruel clarity how little a person knows about one's fellows. Even your household members, even your dear ones, may in a moment of eclipse find in you any wicked fault. I drown in the darkness. Suddenly, in the heart of blindness, I hear a voice. Truth will not die with the grocer. Truth will not die with the short lady. Truth will not die with your death. My soul awakened and trembling sensed that the King of Glory was with her in the foul store. I always said The voice of God is over the mighty waters. The voice of God is in the song of the morning stars. The voice of God is in the whirlwind. And here, in the heart of the tumult, the Lord of winds gathered me on the waves of hatred as on a viscous stone. I came and danced before him. I raised my voice in song to truth, whose footstool are sun, moon, and stars. I almost kissed the grocer, for behind his worried back was revealed to me the view of shining freedom, the freedom of the lands of the Sabbath, which burns in the songs of the palace dwellers. I did not lose favor with the butterfly in paradise and with the winds that roar above the sea. I did not bow before the glance that sees in my cheeks the wrinkles of defeat, but doesn't see my soul that roams in the fullness of the universe, doesn't know that my soul is a ray of the sun and will not be caught in the palm. So maybe I'll just say a few short things about this poem. I mean, I think that this poem, one of the things that this poem does is, I talked about Yehuda Amichai's working through this space between the ordinary, the secular, and the sacred. I think for her, the space that she occupies is the space between, let's call it sort of mystical visions and psychological realities, intense psychological realities. The line that's so striking is, I always said, the voice of God is over the mighty waters. I always said, this is the book of Psalms. She always said it because you read it from a prayer book. The voice of the God is over the waters. Kol Adonai ba. It's like I know the tune for it. I'm sure you do too, Ron. Kol Adonai ba'amayim. Because we have some singing, Persian singing. I always say the voice of the God is, I don't say voice of God is in the whirlwind. I recite those words. She's saying them. When she says the voice of the God is in the whirlwind, she's describing a psychological state of deep shame. Do you know the kind of shame when you've been accused of something that you feel people's eyes on you and the blood rushes through your ears and you can't think and hear? That's the voice of the God is in the whirlwind. She has discovered a kind of biblical truth in that. And God here is, she says over and over again, God is truth. The truth being, I did not steal that woman's wallet. The idea that God is truth, which is a philosophical truism that you can hear everywhere, but the moment that you're falsely accused, the moment that you're in prison, about to be executed for a crime you haven't committed, right? We just saw somebody getting out of jail after 28 years and talking about how he has given up his rage because it was consuming him. This just happened like about 10 days ago. To say God is truth is to say, I know that what I'm experiencing here is not the entire reality. She brings the psychology of, let's call it, the crazy middle-aged overweight woman that's treated like the immediate suspect in all circumstances and finds in it a kind of religious truth that I think explains what God is and explains what it means to encounter God from within a kind of moment of psychological turmoil that turns out to have biblical, prayerful roots.
What struck me most was the notion of truth in this poem and halaj, right? And al-haq.
We were just been dealing with that.
Exactly, right? So you have an extremely important way of working through what is truth for the individual, what connections, what mystical experiences come in. And here again, the other extremely famous person is Ibn Arabi. He died in 1240, so would have been sort of an older contemporary of Rumi, who died in 1273. And Ibn Arabi is considered a philosopher, a Sufi. Some schools think of his understanding as theosophical. He is credited with a certain sort of outlook on life called Wahdat al-Wujud, the unity of all beings. And that is very important for him. His own biographical sketch is also really interesting because he goes to Mecca for the pilgrimage and sees a beautiful woman. And in Mecca, when you perform the pilgrimage or the Umrah, the lesser pilgrimage, women do not cover their face. And so they would have the hijab, but not a face veil. And he sees this beautiful woman and falls in love with her. And the entire sort of idea of love of God and love of the human, still doing crazy things, okay, opens up paths for him in terms of what it means to have that unity of being. And then I wanted to quote this poem of his. So here it is in his Tarjuman al-Ashwaq, which really is the translator of passionate ashwaq, ishq. In Arabic, ishq has this extremely important quality of passionate love, which is different from platonic, which is different from love of the child. This is passionate love. And within that, he says, when one gets into that state, his famous lines are, my heart has become capable of every form. It is a pasture for gazelles and a convent for Christian monks and a temple for idols and the pilgrim's Kaaba and the tables of the Torah and the book of the Quran. I follow the religion of love. Whatever way love's camels take, since love is my religion and my faith. Right? So again, the idea that the camel has its own mind and takes you wherever. So love's camel, and it cannot often be controlled by its master either. So this notion that once one comes to that realization. Now what is interesting is the same singer that I had earlier has used this almost universalist understanding of where love takes you and how it can become, you know, the tablet of the Torah, it can become the Hindu's temple, it can become the Kaaba, it can become the Christian monks, it can become the pasture for gazelles. This particular singer has added his own very interesting twist to this. And then he's taken the azan, which is the Muslim call to prayer, which essentially starts off by Allahu Akbar, God is greatest or greater than, La ilaha illallah, God, there's no God but God, Muhammad Rasulullah, ashhadu an. So he takes that and he turns it into an azan, a call to prayer. But again, you know, this singer, who's contemporary singer, Lebanese, goes into a call for the prayer of the lovers and says, this is where love hits you hard, and this is where it will be continuous. So again, the realization of God and truth and calling the name of God and saying there's no God but God and He is the greater. How does that, when you look at it from an experiential sort of perspective, and when your prayer comes in, you know, what does it do to you? So here is the version, the azan itself, and you will hear it in this one. So I want to end with that.
لقد صار قلبي.
This is the poem that I read of the Ibn Arabi poem, right?
لقد صار قلبي قابلا كل صورة فمرعى لغزلان ودير لرهبان وبيت لأوثاني وكعبة طائف وألواح توراة ومصحف قرآن أدين أدين بدين الحب أدين بدين الحب.
So here it turns into religion as when it becomes the religion of love. Adinu bidin al-hubbi.
أن نتوجه فالحب ديني أشهد أن الإنسانية بالعشق تحيا أشهد أن الإنسانية بالعشق تحيا وأشهد أن وأشهد أن الله على الدوام وأشهد أن الله مع العاشقين على الدوام حي على الهوى حي على حي على خير الغرى حي على خير الغرى ها قد قامت الصلاة بقلوبكم ها قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر.
No matter how many times I hear this, it is incredible. He says when one submits to love, so he plays on each of the verses or the portions of the azan, of the call to prayer, and says, the call to prayer says, I witness that God, there is no God but God. I witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. And he says, I witness that those who submit to the religion of love, with them is God forever. And then the second part of the azan says, come to prayer, come to success. And he says, come to love, come to passionate love. And when you do that, the Allahu Akbar, God is greater than anyone, is going to be manifested in your heart. And that is the actual prayer that you should be reciting.
Round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
What I could see coming through from the poems that you both shared was an experiential modality of acquiring or connecting to the divine, which is being offered in these mystical manners, and the possibility of arriving there faster or quicker or more impactful than probably doing it in the ritualistic modalities of prayer.
Yep.
Right? So either that face during Hajj, where a technical person might say you can't even look at your wife lustfully while you're at Hajj. But here he is inspired by looking at this woman's face to connect to God at that level. Or that woman who thinks, I'm accused because this person has lost their wallet, and just because of the way I'm dressed or my identity that I carry, they're going to they're going to accuse me of having done that. And I think being in a body of a person who actually dons her religious identity, I have felt that many times. My first time here in Berkeley, when I took a wrong exit and I ended up at some government facility. And all I saw was these hunky guys coming in, talking, I can book her on this and I can book her on that. Now, all those things just went in my head. Wait a minute, I just took a wrong exit. I didn't know that it would land me here. And that's where you find that connection with the divine. There's just, somebody's got my back. I'm not alone. I hear that voice of reassurance. So I think what came out was all these different experiential modalities, being it standing in front of a store that sells buttons, or looking at the face of a beautiful person during Hajj, or even thinking, that in my death is my life, and what everybody thinks is blasphemous is wajib upon me. Wajibun alayya, as he says, and haramun inda al-muslimin.
The ordinary, the sinful, the blasphemous.
Everything's.
I just heard, Carol, aren't you, you're a textile artist, right? And aren't you, Jane, don't you also, well, we have all, I totally didn't realize we had a whole textile section here. The ordinary, what we think of is just those moments that aren't yet, right? When she has these intense mystical moments when she's lighting candles before Shabbat, but you can have that in the worst possible moment of your life, accused of a crime. You can have that in the most ordinary, right? The textile as the sacred ark.
And how the ordinary is undermined in Rumi's imagination by Moses, and how Moses gets undermined.
Right.
And what teaching happens, right?
And where
Again.
teaching will come from.
Exactly.
It'll come, who knows where, right?
Yeah, I think this opening up for encounter is
prayer.
something that has, opening up in a way that we might not even be opening up in a ritualistic form of prayer,
Absolutely.
because we are so bound by technicalities and legislative laws.
Right,
that
blah, blah,
cover
blah,
that.
blah, blah. And then suddenly you're saying it, and it means something again. And it's the poetry maybe is the life within the prayer that is a little not so filled with life.
I can totally understand why it would be blasphemous for Hallaj's poem or Rumi's,
Or even for this singer, Ahmed Hawili is his name, and for him to recite the azan and change the names, and you can see the audience going crazy and loving it, right? Because it's so personal, so experiential, for something as ritualistic as the call to prayer. No word has ever changed from that, right? And that's what every time I hear, I'm in a different plane altogether. So.
We can take one comment or question, and we must really wrap it up. Yes.
I know we have to go to my colleague Raya, and I have to go to Islamic and Jewish poetry. So just to say two things. One is that one of the things that struck me is that revelation in both the sets of poetry is being offered to the humble, So the shepherd, the shopkeeper, the son of the shopkeeper, the middle-aged, overweight, former kindergarten teacher, to whom I must say I particularly resonate.
Poor woman, we can say. She was poor.
And I love the lifting up in both his poems of the fact that, it is this humble person who can achieve this, really deep communion and understanding of the divine. And the other thing I want to say, which I just can't walk out of here without saying, so hope it's okay, but I'll put it this way. Anybody in this room who wears religious garb finds himself in a situation where they're not being respected, I hope you all have our phone numbers.
we will come. Okay.
You'll find me in a cafe, I'll come running.
We come full circle from Naomi's story of having Naomi's number, but I will never reveal as to how we got out of that checkpoint. I cannot ever reveal that. It
If
was
you're ever in
pure,
that situation.
pure smarts and pure deviousness of myself that we got out of that checkpoint, and I would never do that again.
Thank you, everyone.
Shukran. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.